Are going to be in Exodus chapter 27 today, and some more, I guess you would call them furnishings for the tabernacle, for the worship experience that Israel had. And if you're tired of talking about furniture, well, next week we're talking about clothes. So, I mean, it's two of my favorite topics to talk about are furniture and clothing. So, well, it's important stuff in a real way, but it's also um, maybe not the most exciting. Doesn't have to be exciting to be important. So, chapter 27 of Exodus, beginning in verse 1, we'll read through verse 8. And you shall make the altar of acacia wood, 5 cubits long and 5 cubits wide. The altar shall be square, and its height shall be 3 cubits. You shall make its horns on its 4 corners. Its horns shall be of one piece with it, and you shall overlay it with bronze. You shall make in pails, make its pails, for removing its ashes and its shovels and its basins and its forks and its fire pans. You shall make all its utensils of bronze. And you shall make for it a grating of network of bronze. And on the net you shall make 4 bronze rings in its 4 corners. You shall put it beneath under the ledge of the altar, so that the net will reach halfway up the altar. You shall make poles for the altar, poles of acacia wood, and overlay them with bronze. Its poles shall be inserted into the rings, so that the poles shall be on the 2 sides of the altar when it is carried. You shall make it hollow with planks, as it was shown to you in the mountain. So they shall make it. Okay, what do we think about that? They're being given, clear enough guidelines to where we can reproduce these things today, as I've mentioned. So, at least with a certain degree of confidence that we're able to replicate what was made then. So, any other thoughts on the altar? It's a utilitarian piece in a sense. It has a symbolism of importance. The whole aspect of all of this stuff is symbolic in a way. There was a time when I was a kid, people in the church like to downplay symbolism. They didn't think it was very important. I think sometimes symbolism is more important than the literal meaning. But the the sacrifices and all that, I don't think it was so much that God needed those sacrifices. It was Israel needed to make those sacrifices. And it's kind of like Mother's Day and Father's Day presents and stuff like that. You don't give your parents stuff. Most of the time, you don't give your parents stuff because they need it. You're usually better off than you are. You give it to them because you need to give it to them. It's your need that is met by giving. And also, I think there is this pattern and message of the Old Testament that sin requires a sacrifice. I'm not trying to downplay that at all, um, but I think rather than God needing it in and of Himself, He is getting it from the people who need to give it and receiving it in that way. Um, and this is, whenever you have an altar, if you build it out of wood, it's got to be covered with something or it's going to burn up. So they have it with bronze, and bronze isn't quite as precious or expensive as gold, which they make. I have in your handout notes about the altar for the burning of incense, that was made out of gold, but probably not as hot and not as not getting animal drippings, blood and fat, grease, and that smoke and all that on it as much. So it could be a little more delicate than the bronze altar, this primary altar. It appears, one of the real fundamental assumptions we make, and I'm sure there's really good reasons for it, but it's always made me wonder, what if we find out we're really wrong on this, but that a cubit is roughly 18 inches? That's probably true. I'm not disputing it at all, but we extrapolate, we assume that that's true, and then make a lot of extrapolations based on that. But the the size of this altar was maybe around a quarter of the size of the altar that Solomon put in the temple when he constructed the temple. So much more portable, and this whole thing is made to take on the road, and the altar would be as well. They were at the end of Exodus chapter 20. They were instructed on how to make altars for sacrifices, kind of less formal altars, maybe one-use altars or whatever, but they were supposed to use earthen altars or stones that had not been cut by human beings. I think it's likely, and I'm say that I think, evidently it's likely that these, it's not that I did all this research myself, but the interior of the altar was probably lined with earth or these uncut stones, again, to protect the bronze, which is protecting the wood, and to comply with the teachings and instructions of Exodus chapter 20 about the altars to make sacrifices on. So maybe they left the rocks behind when they left. I don't know, but it's a very utilitarian piece for a theological purpose. It's not super ornate. It's not made out of gold. It's not super extravagant, but it is an important symbolic component of Israel's worship. The horns of the altar, of course, have a significance beyond just worship. They have this legal significance, really. If you are charged with murder, if you can get there, you can get to the altar and cling to the horn of the altar until you can plead your case that it wasn't murder, that it was self-defense or an accident or something like that. And thereby your life is spared rather than being stoned. Sometimes they pulled you off the altar. So that was, it wasn't a guaranteed safety. It bought you some time, and that might be all it bought you, was a little bit of time. But it does have that significance in the course of Israel's history, that it's not just a place for worship, but it also has a legal significance as well. Any other thoughts on the altar before we move on? Okay. Kind of like a little bit like a barbecue, really. You got the grill halfway down, and it's not a real big leap. I mean, they're cooking this stuff. They're sacrificing it, burning it, but cooking it as well. So some of it would be eaten, some of it would not. Some of it would be shared with the priest, some of it would be just the priest. So there's a lot of different offerings and things. So okay, let's move down to verses 9 through 19, and we'll look at the courtyard of the tabernacle. You shall make the court of the tabernacle on the south side. There shall be hanging for the court of fine twisted linen, 100 cubits long for one side, and its pillars shall be 20, with their 20 sockets of bronze. The hooks of the pillars and their bands shall be of silver. Likewise, for the north side length, there shall be, in length, there shall be hangings of 100 cubits long and 20 pillars with their 20 sockets of bronze. The hooks of the pillars and their bands shall be of silver. For the width of the court of the west side shall be hangings of 50 cubits with their 10 pillars and their 10 sockets. The width of the court of the east side shall be 50 cubits. The hangings for the one side of the gate shall be 15 cubits with their 3 pillars and their 3 sockets. And for the other side shall be hangings of 15 cubits with their 3 pillars and their 3 sockets. For the gate of the court there shall be a screen of 20 cubits of blue and purple and scarlet material, fine twisted linen, the work of a weaver, and with their 4 pillars and their 4 sockets. And the pillars around the court shall be furnished with silver bands with their hooks of silver and their sockets of bronze. The length of the court shall be 100 cubits, and the width 50 throughout, and the height 5 cubits of fine twisted linen, and their sockets of bronze. And all the utensils of the tabernacle used in all its service, and all its pegs, and all the pegs of the court shall be bronze. Okay, what do you think about that? Yes. For outdoor use and everything. Oh, yes. And the size of it is pretty big. It's 150 feet by 75 feet, which gives it a square footage of 11,250 square feet, which is a pretty good size structure. You're bringing animals in. You got a big gate, 20-foot gate, so you can bring animals in. You got to turn them around. You got to deal with them in that context and have people there to deal with them. So they needed some room, and this would have been a spacious place for them to do that. It's not covered overall. The courtyard is going to, you have the tent itself, of course, is covered, but the courtyard is wide open for all of this going on. They're in a pretty arid climate, pretty mild temperature in terms of winter. It's not going to be real cold, but it's not going to be covered when it does rain or whatever. And I was at a conference in San Diego a couple years ago, and there was the main meeting was in this huge, big building, big square, basically industrial-looking building. You went inside, and then there was not a single bathroom in that building. So all the bathrooms were in a different building in a courtyard. You had to walk outside, uncovered, to go to the bathroom if you wanted to. And I thought that was interesting, but I thought, well, we're in San Diego, so you don't mind walking outside to go to the bathroom so much. But you know, some folks grew up having to go outside to go to the bathroom, having to put their boots on before they went to the bathroom. So it wasn't quite like that, but it was. There may have been a bathroom somewhere back there for the people speaking and stuff like that, back behind the stage or something. I'm not aware of. But in the main area, for those of us little attendees that don't have any status, you needed to use the bathroom, you had to go outside. It wasn't too far. It wasn't a bad walk, but if you're handicapped or bad weather, it would be potentially quite inconvenient.
This thing is going to have to, I mean, when they erect it, there's going to have to be a very flat place. This isn't a place to put up in the house. sound like at all.
Okay.
If you make something of that size, you're gonna have to have something flat.
Fairly level to put it on. Yeah. Okay. And the screenings of the tabernacle are 5 cubits, so 7.5 feet. That's pretty tall, and it's tall enough that you couldn't just walk around and look into the courtyard all the time. So there is this idea, or I think, intentional component of the tabernacle, which is when you're going to worship God, you have to do it specifically and intentionally. And I think sometimes when we talk to people about worship, we will hear things like, "Well, I'm closer to God out in the deer woods or the oak woods or whatever than I am in church." And I think you can never tell someone how they feel. You can't challenge their experience. I got a call about that yesterday. Do you believe in such and such? And I'm saying, well, I can't tell somebody that what they think happened to them didn't happen to them. That's their experience. That's their story. Um, so you can't tell someone that they don't feel closer to God in the oak woods than they do in a church building. They may. At the same time, God calls upon his people to worship him, and when he does so, it is an intentional and specific act of worship. It's not coincidental with everything else that's happening in the world. It's not coincidental with, being out on the ocean and fishing for salmon because they're running or whatever. It is specific, it is intentional, and that aspect of worship is, I think, what God wants. He wants us to devote ourselves to him and him alone for a time so that our devotion to him can then permeate and guide the rest of our lives as we go out in the world, not finding him just through our lives, but finding him and then going out and living our lives. So it's I understand, it's probably a lot more fun for some folks to go elk hunting than it is to go to church. And there was a big thing. I talked about this a little bit. I don't know if I did it in a formal setting or just conversationally, but there was a video series. This has got to be over around 20 years ago, and I don't remember the name of it. I don't want to besmirch anything, but basically the theme of it was if you want men, because women's attendance at church has stayed pretty steady. It's the men that have quit coming, basically, in most places. If you want men to come to church, you need to make church like a Rambo movie. That was the theme of it. You need to make church more exciting, more lights, camera action, more explosions, I guess. And the thing about this worship that Israel has, it is visceral, more so than ours. It is, the animals and the blood and all of the things going on. It is a more visual and visceral experience. They're smelling it. You're burning the incense and all this going on. So it is more engaging of the senses than what we do. There's no doubt about that. As far as men having to have it, I don't know. I grew up with men. When we lived in South Texas, about probably 3/4 of the men of our congregation worked at oil refineries, and they shifted. They would work 8 to 3, 3 to 11, 11 to 7, whatever. They worked their shifts rotated, and those old guys would work the graveyard shift sometimes. They'd work 12 to 8, go home, sleep for an hour or so, get up, come to church, go back home, sleep for a few more hours, come back Sunday night to church, and then go back home and sleep a little bit more, and then go in for their midnight shift. And they didn't really want a pat on the back for it. They didn't need a lollipop. Every time anybody does anything good anymore, it seems like they need a lollipop for it. And those guys, they did all that, and it was a very conventional and traditional worship service. So this I need a Rambo movie when I go to church is, well, would you like a cherry or a grape lollipop with that? Kind of, It's kind of a sign of our decline, I think, to some extent. The courtyard, though, I mean, it's, the tabernacle itself is kind of maybe the focus of the study and the focus point of the worship itself. But the courtyard really was kind of where Israel intermingled with each other as they were close to the presence of God, too. The temple courtyard was always packed with people. As the people of God grow numerically, this courtyard has to be expanded. They have to have multiple courtyards. They can't get all of this done with just one place. And he has to navigate the throngs outside of the temple in the first century. And what happens when you have all these people huddled up for a long time? Well, someone's going to bring a hot dog stand up alongside. Somebody's going to, let's say, hey, we got an audience here, and try to make a profit of it. And of course, there's also more than that going on with the money changers and all that. That was a very corrupt system led by the religious leadership, really, of Israel. It wasn't just somebody looking to make a buck. It was more than that. But wherever you have large groups of people, you start having to need to provide services for those people. And anyway, that Jesus has a lot to say about and interesting encounters in the temple, in the courtyard context. Any other thoughts on the courtyard? Okay, the last couple of verses of chapter 27. Y'all might be really lucky and get out early today. You shall charge the sons of Israel that they bring you clear oil of beaten olives for the light to make a lamp burn continually. In the tent of the meeting, outside the veil, which is before the testimony, Aaron and his son shall keep it in order from evening to morning. Before the Lord, it shall be a perpetual statute throughout their generations for the sons of Israel. Okay, what do you think about that? That's an interesting consideration. And where did they get all the oil? They didn't have olive groves. They're their own. Well, I wish there were some stories in the Bible where the olive oil never ran out. There's two. Well, with Elijah, it doesn't run out. It's always an adequate supply. With Elisha, it overflows. It just keeps. It's in every container that widow can come up with. It's an interesting. There's a lot of parallels between Elisha and Elijah, which I think are to show that Elisha is following in the footsteps. He is the chosen successor of Elijah as a prophet. But in some ways, Elisha is greater than Elijah in a way, mainly because when Elijah, in terms of the story of the two oils, and I don't have the passages looked up here, but you can find those. Elijah is blessing a Gentile woman. He is staying with a Gentile woman, and he is blessing her, and God sustains her and her son. Elijah raises her son from the dead. When Elisha performs a similar miracle, raises a young man from the dead, it is for a Jewish woman. And she's a widow. And the oil doesn't just sustain her, it enriches her. It makes her wealthy. It secures her financially for the rest of her life. That's the purpose of that miracle. So you could look at those two stories and say God blesses all of creation, but he more greatly and more fully blesses his chosen people, those who follow him. They receive a greater portion of the blessing. So, but yeah, I think that's entirely possible. They had big vats of oil they brought out of Egypt, and they just never ran out. Have you ever had some kind of product that you got the wrong thing, and you kind of made do for a while, and you thought, well, when I run out, I'll go get what I really want, and then that won't ever run out. You know, that toothpaste you got, and it's the wrong flavor. It just tube lasts forever. So I think God is at work in allowing, in both giving Israel these commandments to follow and providing for their capacity to obey them, giving them the skills to create the products that He wants used in uh, in this setting, and then also uh, making sure they're able to continually obey the Word of God. So it's kind of an eternal flame. It's kind of something that is a constant reminder. You know, after the cloud and the fire and all that go away, you have this eternal flame. You walk by the tabernacle. You can't see in it, and you're just walking by because the screen's 7.5 feet tall. You can't just look into it, but there's always that light shining, and so it's a kind of perpetual reminder. This is not just an empty place of worship. This is the house of God. This is the presence of the Lord with Israel, and it's there. You may not be able to fully appreciate it all the time without specifically attempting to worship, without making that your real focus of what you're trying to do at that time. But at the same time, there's continual presence, continual reminder of the presence of God. So this, you can see why this courtyard and the setting would be so important, uh, have such an impact on so many people. Yes, sir. Okay. For everybody, for a large group. I think it was supposed to go all the time. Uh, you shall make a lamp burn continually. At the end of verse 20. Uh, so it's tended. Maybe they fill it up before they head out in the morning. Uh, okay. Well, mine says to make a lamp burn continually. I think you could kind of, what does continually mean? Does it mean 24/7? Does it mean every day for a time? I don't know. So that's a good question. It wouldn't be very visible during the day anyway. So when they're walking by the tent at night, they see the light. Hmm. There was a demonstrable presence. This light is supposed to provide that as well. There's demonstrable presence of the Lord, reminder of the presence of the Lord, and it's all of this stuff, I think, and then we're going to get into the priestly garments next week, but all of these things are, in a sense, God accommodating Israel's need for something tangible, for something, blessed are you because you have seen, blessed are those who believe and have not. You believe because you have seen, blessed are those who believe and have not seen. At some point, um, we have to accept on faith what we cannot see. And we see it when we believe in it, rather than we believe in it because we've seen it. So, but there is this, Israel comes from a long line of idol worshippers and is surrounded by idol worshippers. And all of these things are not idols, but they are a way God can connect to an idolatrous people and try to move them away from it.
This is not something that breaking up the chicken or whatever, you will see blood. You cut it, and
Mm-hmm.
we have to over the chopping block.
Then the chicken takes off.
Scared him to death, and here the chicken went out, full head on, and the blood was, that's one of the, it's not a clean in the sense, you've got blood splattering, and you've got blood on things.
It's a living organic experience as opposed to our super sanitary. Like when farmer people, even today, a lot of them are kind of going back to this, but a lot of y'all probably grew up with chickens. When you had a chicken dinner, mom went out and killed the chicken. And that's now when you have a chicken dinner, somebody went down to the grocery store and he bought a chicken. Who knows when it died, when it was killed, and you don't see blood, or you don't. It's all cellophane. It's all very sanitized. It's also kind of dead. I mean, it's dead before you even get it. You go to developing countries and you go to their open air markets. If you want to buy a chicken, you don't buy one that's dead already. Yeah. Yes. But when you don't have refrigeration, the safest way to have animal protein is to have it live as long as possible. So it's a different reality, and I don't know which is better. Ours is probably more convenient, but does that make it better? I guess this is getting off track, and we're actually went through our time. But there was a debate recently. Some news type commentator or whatever said that the world is a better place because of slavery. I would say the world is a more technologically advanced place because of slavery. We have, the world we have now in large part because developers were able to get very inexpensive labor to do a lot of the work. I think the world would be a better place if humans had always treated each other as fully human, as each human being a full bearer of the image of God. We would not probably be as technologically advanced, but we might be a much better place to live. We wouldn't have whole civilizations getting blown up. I mean, so that's uh, better, worse, different. Sometimes it's just different. Okay. Mm-hmm. Amen. Okay. Mr. Wade, will you lead us in a closing prayer, please, sir?